I heard it the way a man hears his own name at a graveside, sharp, cold, and meant to bury him. I was walking out of the pharmacy when a woman I barely knew smiled at me in pity and said, "I heard you're homeless now. Your daughter mentioned it. I'm so sorry." For a second, the world didn't move. My breath stuck in my throat. I thought she must have confused me with someone else, but her eyes were too certain, too soft, with sympathy. That sympathy wasn't earned. It was stolen. I asked her who told her that. She didn't hesitate. She said my daughter's name as if it explained everything. And maybe it did. My hands trembled as I stepped away from her, the bottle of blood pressure pills dull in my palm. I kept hearing that word, homeless, like it had been carved into me without warning. I've survived storms, layoffs, and the long, slow fading of people I loved, but nothing prepared me for that lie. I walked to my car with that single word echoing in my mind. It didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like betrayal. It sounded like a door slamming from the inside, one I didn't even know she had closed. I sat there a long time before I could even start the engine, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering what part of me she wanted to erase to make room for her story. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't any of the things she had painted me as. In fact, I was the one quietly keeping a roof over her head. For 6 years, I had paid her rent every month without a word. I did it because she said she needed time to get on her feet, and I believed a parent should help where they can, even when it hurts a little. I told myself it was temporary, but every month the payments went out, and every month she accepted them like gravity, something that simply existed without question. To hear her say the opposite, to hear she had chosen a lie that put dirt on my name, that was a different kind of wound. It wasn't the money. Money can be earned again. It was the dignity she played with. The story she told others wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a rewriting of who I was, and I didn't know why. The first sting became something heavier when I remembered moments from the past year. Her pulling away, her clipped answers on the phone, the tension in her voice when I asked if she needed anything. There had been distance long before this lie. Now I wondered who helped build it between us. Lies rarely grow on their own. Someone feeds them. I sat there with the engine running and the radio humming static, trying to understand what I had done to deserve this public humiliation. Shame is a strange thing. It burns even when you know you did nothing wrong. It makes you question your worth, your memory, even your sanity. And at my age, you hold tightly to what little dignity you have left. The part that hurts most is simple. She didn't have to lie. She could have asked for help, told the truth, or said nothing at all. Instead, she chose a story that made me look like a burden she escaped, rather than the reason she still had a warm place to sleep. And now I can't shake the question that's clawing at me. Who wanted her to see me this way? Who benefits from making me small? What would you do if your own child lied about your dignity? I never meant for the rent payments to become a secret, but that's what they turned into. Another quiet part of my life she never bothered to ask about. It started the year she moved into that little apartment she loved so much. She told me she was proud to have her own place, proud to finally stand on her own feet. I didn't correct her when she said it. I just nodded and told her I was proud too. That was the first lie I let live, and I've wondered many times if letting it grow was the beginning of everything that followed. At first, the payments were easy enough. I was still working, still healthy, still able to carry more than I should have. But over time, jobs changed. My knees began to ache, and my retirement plan started slipping further away. Still, every month I wrote the check or set up the transfer. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't a burden I complained about. It was what a father does. At least, that's what I told myself as I quietly skipped small comforts to keep her safe and stable. There were nights I sat by the kitchen table doing the math, trying to stretch dollars that didn't want to stretch anymore. I cut back on trips, on eating out, on repairs I should have done years ago. My own roof leaked one spring, and I waited almost a year to fix it because her rent came first. That's not something I say with pride. It's something I said with love, a love that asked for nothing back. Meanwhile, she walked around with a confidence I thought I had helped her build. She told her friends how she made it on her own, how she handled everything without help. I heard her say it once during a holiday dinner. She laughed and said she never needed a hand from anyone. I remember staring at my plate, feeling something in my chest tighten. Not anger, not yet, just a quiet ache, like realizing a door you thought was open had been closed for years without you noticing. There were small cracks even then. Times she snapped when I asked how she was managing bills. Times she pulled away when I tried to offer advice. She said she didn't want to feel controlled, as if every gentle question was a leash. I kept thinking I was doing something wrong, that maybe my silence about the rent had made her believe I didn't trust her. But the truth is simpler and sadder. She didn't know what she didn't know. The more she believed in her false independence, the more resentful she became of anything that reminded her she hadn't built her life alone. Her pride hardened into something sharp, and I watched it, helpless, as it pushed me farther from her with every passing year. I thought keeping my help hidden would protect her confidence. Instead, it fed a story that grew wild in her mind. One where I played the villain holding her back, not the father holding her up. Now I wonder if silence can be its own kind of mistake. One paid for not in money, but in distance. Do children understand what parents sacrifice in silence? I didn't lose her all at once. That might have been easier. Instead, it happened the way seasons change. So slowly you don't see the shift until the weather feels wrong on your skin. At first, her distance looked like busyness. A missed call here, a late reply there. She brushed it off with quick messages, short excuses, promises to catch up soon. But soon never came. Eventually, my phone stopped lighting up with her name altogether. I remember calling her one evening after seeing something that reminded me of her childhood, a small thing, only meaningful to a father. She declined the call and didn't call back. That became a pattern. Weeks passed where my voice reached only her voicemail. She didn't invite me over anymore, not even for holidays. Birthdays turned into brief texts. The space between us stretched, pulled tight by something I couldn't see. Old misunderstandings began resurfacing, ones I thought we had worked through years ago. She mentioned feeling controlled as a teenager, feeling like I made choices without letting her breathe. I tried to explain, gently, that every decision back then came from trying to keep her safe, especially after her mother passed. But she twisted the memory, as if I had caged her rather than protected her. The first real crack came during an argument I never saw coming. She told me I had never supported her, not emotionally, not financially, not in the ways she needed. The words hit me harder than anything she had said before. I felt something drop inside me, like the air had been punched out of my chest. I almost told her right then about the rent, the sacrifices, the nights I went without so she didn't have to. But I held it back because it felt wrong to defend myself with the very love I had given freely. Still, her accusation cut deep. I went home that night, turning her words over and over, trying to understand how she could believe them. Guilt pulled at me from one side, reminding me of every imperfect moment from her childhood. Truth pulled from the other, steady but painful, reminding me of everything I had done, everything I had given quietly, without asking for recognition. The more confusing part was the sharpness in her voice, like someone else had put that edge there. It didn't sound like her. Not the girl I raised, not the young woman who once leaned on me when life first started showing its teeth. This version of her felt coached, pushed, shaped by whispers I hadn't heard. Something or someone was feeding her a story about me, rewriting our history in a way that erased every sacrifice and replaced it with blame. I could feel it, even if I couldn't prove it yet. And that fear, the fear of losing her, not to life, but to influence, settled heavy on my chest. I kept asking myself if silence had created the space for these lies to grow, or if the lies were planted by someone who needed her to forget the truth. The message came on a quiet afternoon, the kind where the house feels too still and the silence presses on your chest. I almost didn't open it. The name on the screen wasn't familiar, and in my age, unknown names often bring scams or bad news. But something made me tap it anyway. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation. The first line stopped me cold. I don't know if you're aware of what your daughter is going through. For a moment, my heart stumbled. I read the line twice, then kept going. The writer introduced herself as someone who knew my daughter through work. Nothing close, nothing intimate, just someone who had seen enough to feel troubled. She said she wasn't trying to interfere, only reaching out because she had watched my daughter unravel quietly. According to her, my daughter carried a weight she never showed me. She was stressed, exhausted, and secretive in ways that worried people around her. She pushed others away the same way she had pushed me. But with me, it was sharper, more defensive, almost rehearsed. Reading those words felt like watching a door crack open on a room I didn't know existed. The stranger explained that my daughter often hid in empty conference rooms to cry, then walked out acting as if nothing happened. She kept her phone face down and jumped whenever it buzzed. She avoided mentioning family, especially me, and when coworkers gently asked, she brushed everything off with a brittle laugh that didn't match her eyes. It hurt to picture her like that, hurting, scared, pretending she wasn't. But the part that made my breath catch was the timeline. The Observer said the change began months earlier, around the same time my daughter stopped calling me, stopped visiting, stopped letting me into her life. It matched everything I had noticed, but couldn't explain. Every shift in her tone, every cold reply, every silence. Then came the part that felt like someone squeezing my ribs from the inside. The stranger said my daughter often left the office with someone, a partner or maybe a close friend. Whoever it was, this person looked controlling. My daughter walked beside them like someone bracing for impact. Sometimes the Observer overheard conversations, quiet arguments, tense whispers, words like, "He's holding you back," or "You need distance." That was when unease crawled up my spine. It wasn't a conspiracy, nothing dramatic or unbelievable. It was something far more common and far more dangerous. Influence, slow and steady, changing the way my daughter saw the world, the way she saw me. I sat there reading the message again and again. Each line cut deeper than the last. I felt sorrow for the pain she carried. Alone, fear for the force pulling her away, and an ache of validation that almost hurt more than the doubt. I had felt something twisting between us, and now I finally saw the outline of what it might be. Still, part of me wondered if trusting a stranger was foolish. But another part, the part that had watched my daughter turn into someone I barely recognized, knew I couldn't ignore what was written. Would you trust a stranger who knew more about your child's pain? The next message from the Observer came 2 days later, short but heavy enough to make my hands shake as I read it. She said she didn't want to overstep, but she felt I needed to understand what my daughter was dealing with behind closed doors. Her words painted a picture that was hard to face, yet impossible to ignore. She told me my daughter was drowning in financial pressure. Not the surface-level kind adults complain about, but the kind that keeps you awake staring at the ceiling, wondering which bill you can push back without losing everything. She had taken on debts she never told me about, debts that grew faster than she could catch them. And the person she leaned on, the one I suspected already, wasn't supporting her. He was using her fear to tighten control. According to the Observer, he often lectured her about codes of loyalty, twisting the idea of independence until she felt shame whenever my name came up. He convinced her that needing help was weakness, that her past was filled with mistakes I forced her into, and that she needed to rewrite her life by distancing herself from me. Hearing that felt like someone stepping on my chest. I had spent years trying to give her stability, and now someone else was feeding her stories that turned every sacrifice into a wound. Then came the hardest truth. My daughter had been carrying old misunderstandings for years, things from her childhood she never asked me about. Times when I worked long hours to pay for her schooling, moments when I refused her small wants because I was saving for her future. Practical decisions she saw through a child's eyes and never re-examined as an adult. She believed those choices meant I didn't care enough. She carried that pain quietly, letting it mix with the new pressures she faced, until the whole story of her life became distorted. The Observer said my daughter walked around with guilt she didn't know how to name. She felt torn between proving she could stand alone and admitting she was falling apart. Shame pushed her farther from me, because reaching out would mean revealing the truth of her struggles, and she feared judgment more than collapse. As I read, a painful mix of outrage and protectiveness spread through me. Outrage that someone fueled her resentment. Outrage that lies had been spoken about my role. But stronger than anger was the urge to shield her, even now, from how wrong she had been led to think. I knew defending myself might break what little remained between us. I also knew staying silent meant letting a false history shape her entire future. That was the weight crushing my chest. Choosing between my dignity and her fragile sense of control, I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, wondering how everything had twisted so far from the truth, wondering how many parents carried the same ache, knowing their child's resentment came from shadows, not facts. I chose a quiet cafe for the conversation, somewhere neutral, somewhere she wouldn't feel cornered. I arrived early and sat at a small table near the window, watching people pass by with the kind of ease I hadn't felt in months. My hands rested around a warm cup, but the heat didn't steady me. I kept wondering how to begin without sounding like I was defending myself or accusing her. I just wanted the truth between us to breathe again. When she walked in, I saw the exhaustion before anything else. Tight shoulders, guarded eyes, the weight of someone trying too hard to look composed. She sat across from me without removing her coat, as if ready to leave the moment she felt uncomfortable. That alone told me how fragile this meeting already was. I started gently, telling her I'd asked to meet because I loved her, not because I wanted to argue. I tried to explain that there were things she might not know, things I had kept quiet so she could feel strong in her own life. I spoke about the years of rent payments, the choices I made to protect her from knowing how close I came to running out of money. I didn't present it as a burden. I only wanted her to understand the truth she was never meant to carry. But the more I spoke, the tighter her jaw became. She interrupted me with short breaths, saying she didn't want to feel guilty, that she hated feeling like she was being corrected. She said she had built her life alone, and hearing otherwise made her feel small. I tried to tell her that accepting help didn't make her weak, but my words didn't land the way I hoped. The wall between us rose higher with every sentence. When I mentioned the lies she'd been told about my past decisions, her eyes shifted away. She said she didn't want to talk about old issues, even though those misunderstandings sat at the center of her anger. She wasn't ready to hear that her resentment came from shadows, not facts. Every explanation I offered only made her more defensive, as if the truth was another burden she hadn't prepared for. At one point, her hand trembled slightly as she told me she felt overwhelmed. She said she didn't want to argue, but also wasn't ready to change her mind about anything. I realized then that pushing for clarity would break her, not heal her. She wasn't rejecting me as a father. She was rejecting everything that threatened the story she built to survive her own shame. I felt the hope inside me soften, settling into something more sober. I understood she needed time, maybe distance, to untangle the mess someone else had tied around her. And for the first time, I admitted to myself that loving her didn't mean letting her cut me down to ease her guilt. Walking away from that table, I carried a heavy calm. I had spoken my truth without anger. She had listened without understanding. And somewhere in that painful middle ground, I realized I needed boundaries, not to punish her, but to protect what little of myself I had left. Is setting boundaries protection or painful betrayal? I didn't expect her to come by after our failed conversation, but 2 days later, she showed up at my door. She stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, as if she needed to hold something together inside. I stepped aside without a word, and she walked in slowly, almost hesitant. The silence between us carried the weight of things neither of us knew how to say. She sat on the edge of the couch and stared at her hands. For a long time, she didn't speak, and I didn't push her. When she finally exhaled, it sounded like she had been holding that breath for years. She told me she wasn't proud of how she'd spoken to me. Her voice shook as she admitted she had misunderstood so much of her past, and that her anger was built on memories she never questioned. She said she felt guilty, but guilt was easier to carry than shame. So she held on to the anger instead. Then she said a name, someone I had never met but had heard her mention before. She explained that this person, a partner she trusted, played a bigger role in shaping her beliefs than I ever imagined. He told her I never cared, that I never supported her, that I spent money recklessly while she struggled. She said he made her feel strong by making me look weak, and in her loneliness, she believed him. Hearing his voice in her story felt like a cold hand closing around my chest. As she spoke, I realized her betrayal didn't begin with cruelty. It began with fear of failing, fear of feeling dependent, fear of repeating mistakes she thought she saw in me. She clung to narratives that gave her someone to blame for the pieces of her life that didn't fit the way she wanted. Those stories gave her distance from the truth, but they also carved a deeper distance between us. She looked up at me then, her eyes heavy with confusion and regret. She said she didn't know how to make things right, because every attempt felt like opening an old wound she wasn't ready to face. I felt anger rise inside me, sharp and quick, at the thought of someone using her fear to twist her against me. But it softened just as fast, replaced by something harder to hold. Grief, not just grief for myself, but for her, for the way she had carried a burden built on lies. In that moment, I saw both of us clearly. Two people hurt by different versions of the same story. Two people trying to rebuild something without knowing where the first crack had formed. I wanted to fix it, but I also knew some truths break quietly, not loudly. And some gaps between parent and child can only be crossed if both sides choose to walk toward each other. As she left, she paused at the door, as if waiting for me to tell her what to do next. But for once, I had no answers. Only the knowledge that love cannot erase the damage fear can cause. What consequence is fair when someone hurts you out of fear, not cruelty? I sat at the kitchen table long after she left, the house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. In front of me lay a thin stack of papers I had kept tucked away for years. Every rent receipt, every bank transfer, every record of the help she never knew I provided. The edges were soft now from being handled so many times, each one holding a memory she never saw and a sacrifice she never asked about. They weren't just receipts. They were pieces of a life I spent trying to keep her steady without ever letting her feel the ground tremble beneath my own feet. As I looked at them, I realized how easily proof can feel like power, and how quickly power can turn into a weapon. I had the ability to reveal everything, to show her the truth she never cared to look for. A part of me wanted to place the stack in her hands and watch understanding spread across her face. Another part of me wondered if that would only shatter what little connection we still had left. Sometimes, truth doesn't heal anything. It only exposes new wounds. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the years press against my chest. She believed she had built her life alone. She believed I had stepped away, that my absence was proof of my failure, and I believed she understood the love behind the things I did in silence. We were both wrong. That realization hurt more than anything she said to me. I tried to imagine what would happen if I told her everything. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd apologize. Or maybe she'd feel betrayed all over again, believing I kept the truth from her to control her. There was no certainty in honesty, only risk. And at my age, I've learned that not every risk is worth taking, even when it comes to your own child. So I placed the receipts back into their envelope and closed it with a slow, deliberate motion. They were proof of the past, but they didn't have the power to fix the present. I could hold on to them, not out of bitterness, but because they reminded me that love, even unrecognized, was still real. And that mattered more to me than winning any argument. As evening settled in, I walked to the window and watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one. She lived only a few miles away, but the distance between us felt wider than ever. I knew she might come back someday. I also knew I might be the one who stayed silent, not out of anger, but out of respect for both of us. Some relationships don't break in one moment. They fade quietly, leaving behind an outline of what they used to be. I don't know if sharing the truth would bring us closer or push us farther apart. All I know is that, for now, silence feels kinder than forcing a reckoning she isn't ready for. So I ask you, should I reveal the truth or let her believe the story she built?